This is Launching Your Daughter podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here is today's episode. Episode 21. Welcome. Today's guest is Maya Benatar. As you'll hear, she's a licensed creative art therapist and a board-certified music therapist in New York. She has 2 offices, one in New York City and one in Manhattan. Maya talks about her work with women and how singing, music, and mindfulness can calm worries and fears. We know music is important to most teenagers, and this can be a great way for you parents to connect with them. Music can help us transcend from the stuckness to a place of feeling seen and connected. I hope you pause sometime this week and listen to a song with your teen daughter. Now here is today's episode. Well, welcome everybody. Today my guest is Maya Benatar, and she is a licensed credentialed art therapist in New York. And I'm so excited to have her on today because she works with also anxiety women, and she does music therapy along with mindfulness therapy. So I'm really excited to have her on today. Welcome, Maya.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks so much for having me.
I would love if you could tell our listeners just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I am a licensed creative arts therapist in New York State. And so I practice psychotherapy, traditional psychotherapy, in addition to music therapy. I'm also a board certified music therapist. And so I work primarily with women who are struggling with anxiety, and anxiety that may manifest in many forms, whether that's in their work and their relationships, romantic friendships, just anxiety across the boards, and finding a way to really triumph over anxiety and to use creative methods to understand it and move through it.
Oh, I love that. And I know, and I apologize, I think I got your LCAT incorrect when I first stated it. So thank you for correcting that. But I love doing different creative ways to work with anxiety, because I know a lot of times when I'm working with clients, they only think that the traditional psychotherapy, which is come in, I talk, and that's all we do. And what you're saying is there are other ways to work with that, where it sometimes gets people, I guess I call it kind of out of their heads, maybe a little more into their body or in a different part of their brain, which then helps reduce that anxiety.
Absolutely. I mean, so many of the women, pretty much all of the women that I work with are really in their heads, and they would just talk, for the entire session if I let them. And so we do a lot of work of, noticing what's going on, noticing where the anxiety is hanging out. So that's that mindfulness piece. Mm-hmm. And then really interrupting that pattern, that cycle, and doing something creative which helps bring them back into their bodies. So often there's a huge disconnection between brain and body, between mind and body. And so expressing the anxiety through sound, finding, does it sound like a drum? Does it sound like this fast-paced song? Really giving voice to that anxiety, sitting in it for a little bit, but in a creative way, rather than like, I'm just going to pretend this isn't happening. I'm going to expend all of my effort into getting around the anxiety, which becomes really exhausting after a while and not really productive. So using these creative methods, and I have a lot of different techniques up my sleeve, a lot of different interventions that I'll use to help women just come back into their bodies as creative people, and really use that as a tool to move through the anxiety.
Oh, I love it. I was sitting here shaking my head as you were talking, like, yes, there are so many clients that I work with too, that they're in their head and trying to drop them down into their body and be more in the present moment. Would you mind sharing a little bit about some of the techniques that you use regarding the creativeness of it, whether it's working with the music piece of it or some of the things that you use to help the women?
Absolutely. There are a lot of different tools that I'll use. I can give you a few examples. I'm currently doing a postgraduate training, a 2-year postgraduate training in vocal psychotherapy. So that focuses around the use of the voice to address not only anxiety, but trauma. Sometimes anxiety comes about because of developmental trauma or things like that, that there may not be an awareness around that piece. So vocal psychotherapy uses different vocal techniques, different singing exercises as a way to really get around the brain again and tap into the use of the voice as our primary means of communicating. So when we're born, we communicate through our voices, and that's how we express all of our emotions before we have words. So really tapping into that pre-verbal ability as a way to not only soothe ourselves through the anxiety, but as a way to express what's going on. So kind of tapping into the unconscious and leaving the words aside. So I do a lot of vocal work with clients. They don't have to be singers. Most of my clients are not professional musicians in any right. And that's completely fine. There's no expectation on my part. And part of my intensive training is knowing how to make something comfortable and accessible for anyone. So using a lot of vocal work, using a lot of mindfulness with recorded music. So I'll often work with clients around music that is meaningful to them. And starting from, what do you notice about this music as you listen to it? Where are you feeling it? Is it connected to any memories or any other associations? Really helping them tap into the music that defines who they are, and tapping back into music that helps them, again, to get out of their heads and into their bodies, and then using that as a way to move through the anxiety. So using music as a way to realize that there's more than just, I have anxiety, I need relaxing music. This is something that I write about a lot. But we don't always need relaxing music or soothing, quote unquote, music when we're feeling anxious. Sometimes we need really loud, fast, bass heavy music. So really kind of breaking down some ideas, some preconceived notions about how music can serve anxiety and how music can help soothe anxiety.
I love that, because I know and I'm smiling as you were talking about, sometimes you don't need that calming music. You need something with a little more, drum or bass or something. And
my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, I've got this going on and I just need to get it out. And that's one way for clients. And I know teens, they always say, the teenagers really connect with music, but even young adults do as well, and parents. And it's reminding folks that, music doesn't just stop once you've, got out of high school. It can be a very powerful tool to work through anxiety and sometimes depression as well.
Absolutely. And there's so much truth to what you're saying in terms of, I'll have a lot of parents say, well, my teenager only wants to listen to hip hop, or they're saying that, this Eminem track, relaxes them. How is that possible? And I'll say, well, that's actually really possible. And I'm a big, big advocate of, as I call it, leaning into the music that works for you. Mm-hmm. So recently I wrote, I think it was my last email newsletter, I shared a personal story about how I was feeling somewhat anxious, and and I have all these tools at my disposal, and I was driving at the time. This was a few weeks ago, and I turned on the radio, and the song that happened to be on the radio was Sia's Cheap Thrills, which is not necessarily one of my go-to songs or types of music. And in that moment, it just really worked for me. And I remember turning it way up. I turned the bass up. There's a really cool, kind of backbeat, almost like Middle Eastern drum pattern in that song, which can be really soothing to have that really grounded bass and really grounded rhythmic pattern. And all of a sudden I realized that my anxiety had been soothed, that I was breathing deeply, that I had tapped into that sweet spot of the breath where it's okay, I'm okay. It's all okay. And I doubt it would have been the same if I had, put on the classical radio station and started listening to Vivaldi, which I love, but it just wasn't what I needed in that moment. So it can be really powerful to just realize I need something other than what, is prescribed. I have a lot of clients that come in and say, well, I was listening to, the peaceful piano station on Spotify and it doesn't help my anxiety. Because we have these kind of societal views that music should be relaxing and soothing, and it can be, that could be a really beautiful, meaningful thing, but sometimes it's not what we need. So really expanding the view of how music can serve us and how it can help us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like too that based on some of your blogging that you've done or your newsletters, that it's trying to break through some of the myths that it has to be a certain type of music. And as you said, it really depends on the person and what really resonates for them. And even as you were saying in your personal experience, that sometimes a song will come up and you're like, that just hit the spot today. And that really resonates, even though that may not be my go-to music. that was spot on for the day. So, I love that. That's great. Well, I'm curious, between the sessions then, do you do any kind of assignment for your clients then regarding how they can really continue to use the music to help them manage that anxiety, or even the voice? Do you give them kind of assignments in between?
That's a great question. It depends on the client. I do have a lot of clients who want some sort of an assignment. I generally don't call it an assignment because that feels very like school-like.
Yeah.
And often, it kind of brings to mind the whole like get an A or you don't get an A. And so there's a lot of my clients struggle with perfectionism along with the anxiety.
Yeah.
So I'm really careful about how I kind of phrase the work they do in between. But often the quote unquote assignments are based off of whatever we've done in the session. So let's say in the session, we've tapped into this really joyful, playful place, which is unusual for them, which is, they're often kind of stuck in their anxiety, kind of frozen. And we've managed with music to tap into this really joyful, playful, spontaneous play, which I strongly believe adults need just as much as kids and teens, perhaps more.
Yes.
So we'll talk about, okay, what was that like? Where did you feel it? How might you access this feeling before next week? So to kind of bring to mind, you don't only have to access that in this room with me, but to bring the idea that like you can tap into this when you're walking down the street, when you're at home, when you're at work. And then we brainstorm a little. I usually leave at least 5 minutes for some brainstorming of how might you tap into this? And they'll say, oh, well, this song reminds me of this. Or, you know what, I'm going to go to the beach this weekend. Or I'm going to, read that Brene Brown book that I've been wanting to read, or whatever it might be, And sometimes I keep a stack of index cards in my office. And so sometimes I'll encourage my clients, okay, do you want to write down that goal? So sometimes they'll write down an actual goal. Sometimes they'll just write down a word or a phrase that was meaningful, perhaps something that came to them, during a meditation, or something that they'd like to embody. So I've had clients write things like, I can be calm, or I can take up space, or, playfulness, or whatever it might be. So, and often the symbolic nature of just writing that down and then carrying it out with them.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. I've had clients say, I put it up on my wall over my desk, or I keep it in my wallet, or, I took a picture of it and now it's on my phone, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I definitely believe in if we're going to keep embodying a calm, connected place, a calm, connected body and mind, that there needs to be definitely carryover between sessions. But I'm not strictly limited to it has to be music. Whatever the music help them to tap into, if they can reaccess that in a different way that feels mindful and grounded, then that's totally fine.
Yeah.
That's absolutely great.
Well, and I love that too. And you're right. Yeah, the assignment, I say that because I know most people are kind of understanding of what that work is. But at the same time, I will tell my clients the same thing. No, you do not receive grades here. No, this is not like, a school assignment, but it's that being able to take with them what they've learned throughout the session and be able to continue to incorporate that throughout the week. And I love the idea of having the index cards where they can really write down what it is that impacted them in that moment or throughout that session, because there's so many things that can come up in a session that's something that really stands out for them. It's like, hey, I can really kind of go back to that if I'm struggling throughout the week, or those stressors decide to come back and I'm having a hard time with that. I can go back and reflect on that and get myself regrounded. That's beautiful. So I'm curious, Maya, are there certain questions or concerns that you hear from potential clients coming in about their concerns or fears about even coming into doing therapy and how it even works?
I definitely get questions and concerns because I'm not just a talk psychotherapist, because I am a music therapist. And so I'd say oftentimes when people call me, they're already interested in a creative approach.
Okay.
So part of the quote unquote, talking up the method is already done for me, whether it's by a referral or by my website or whatever it is. But definitely there's often fear around being musical, like what that means.
Yeah.
A lot of us often have old wounds around, I failed piano lessons, or I can't sing, or, whatever it might be. So there's definitely, a piece of work for me to do around explaining it. And I often, with the women that I work with, I'll often say, this is not about you sounding like Adele. I don't sound like Adele. I wish I sound, no, I'll make it playful,
Yeah.
like, this is not about that. This is about how it feels rather than how it sounds.
Yeah.
And in a private space with someone who is really grounded and present with you, it's not about how it sounds, but how it feels. And that's a sentence that I often use because it seems to really resonate with people. And because honestly, what these women want is to feel better, is to feel different. And to a certain extent, they may not care how they get there. If, not that the music isn't meaningful, but if this will help them feel better, then, it's kind of a sign me up kind of deal.
Yeah.
And so it definitely, and I'll ease people in, we don't, a first session, we'll make music of in some way. Whether that is, can you share a piece of music that's meaningful to you and we listen to it together? That might be all that we do in a first session. Or I've had clients who come in and they're ready to improvise. They're ready to just create music in the moment, as opposed to like playing replaying a song that already exists. But improvising is like what jazz musicians do. And so it really depends on the client. But by and large, I'd say all of the clients who I've worked with or I'm currently working with, music is meaningful to them in some way. Music is their strength, is their safe place, is a place where they feel happy or grounded. And so they've already identified it as a place where they feel good. And they're curious about how it could help them feel better, how they could really use it intentionally.
Yeah. And, as you were talking, I was like, oh, and that would be a great little insight to pass along to parents as well. It's like really listen to what your teenager is saying about the music and why they resonate. It's not necessarily whether you agree with the type of song that they've got going on, but why it really resonates with them or how it calms them down or how it shares the message about where they are in this moment in their life. Because as you said, young adults as well, that music is still very important and it conveys various meanings to different people in different ways. And so it's great to be able to slow that down and yeah, how does it feel? Where does it resonate?
Absolutely. There's so much information and so much connection that can be gained by just listening to somebody's music with them.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not given enough credence, I feel, particularly with parents often.
Yeah.
I did a presentation, the beginning of this year, at a private school about music and mindfulness as a way to reduce stress and anxiety for teenagers. And I talked specifically at one point about tapping into the music that your teenager's listening to, trying to put aside, though it may be challenging, if there's cursing and you don't like that, or if it's a type of music that you just can't stand, but what it might mean for them, for you to sit and listen to their music with them. Yeah. Even just one song. I'm not saying, you have to listen to a whole album or something, but one song, and to be really present with them. So to not be on your phone, to not be reading the paper. And I had a mom come up to me afterwards and say, and she was almost in tears, and she said, I was just thinking about what that would have meant to me as a teenager if someone had sat and listened to my music with me, because it's really, you're validating who they are and what's important to them on such a deep personal level. Songs are, for teenagers, that's identity formation at its core.
Yep, absolutely. Oh, and I love that you had even validation from her mom, just like, oh, I so wish I would have had that growing up after your presentation, because it is true. Teens really are trying to connect with their parents, even though they are also trying to pull away from parents and go towards peers. But they really want them to go, this is who I am right now, and please understand me. And I know it can be very difficult sometimes for parents, because there is, they're wanting to try and keep them safe, and they're trying to teach them skills, and at the same time allow their teenager to blossom into who they are, because they're a product of both. They're not just, one or the other. So I love that, different ways of connecting with them and being mindful. And as you said, getting off the phones, turning off the TV, all that stuff to truly, truly connect. I love it. Well, I'm curious. I'd like to kind of shift a little more into, you've already named quite a few benefits that music therapy, creative therapy can do with women and for teenagers and parents. What are some of the other benefits that you see or that clients state really help them throughout this process?
Absolutely. Definitely a lot of my clients talk about being able to have a greater range of self-expression, which is so valuable. Being able to just feel what you feel and then say what you feel.
Yeah.
And I often talk with clients about being able to sit with and to tap into the uncomfortable feelings. I'm a big Brene Brown fan, and she talks a lot. She talks a lot about being able to, if you numb the uncomfortable feelings, you're also numbing the good ones, the positive ones. I'm paraphrasing, but she's got some great quotes about you need to be able to show up for the vulnerable feelings, because that's how you show up for the joyful ones as well. So, and music is such a great way to experience that, because music it can express, shame and jealousy and fear and anxiety. Music can hold all of that. It doesn't just have to be happy. It can be happy. There's nothing wrong with happy music for sure, but music has such a range to it. So being able to really have that power to step in and out of uncomfortable emotions and not get stuck in them is something that a lot of my adult women clients talk about. Being able to feel, okay, I'm feeling fearful, but I can identify that, I can do something about it, and I can move through it, rather than I'm feeling fearful and then I fall down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. You were saying that earlier too about some of the music that joyfulness and playfulness that happens during session, and not getting so stuck in the fears, the anxiety, or the shame and the vulnerability. I say the same thing to my clients too, and I'm also a big Brene Brown fan. But there is that being in the uncomfortable for a moment, to give yourself permission to be, and then as you expand that, you really do move through it.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of times, especially for teenagers too, there's a fear of, I can't be uncomfortable. Everything has to be perfect. And it's like, there is no perfect. And giving ourselves some grace of having all different sorts of emotions and being able to find the language or the voice to be able to express that to others is extremely powerful.
Absolutely. I love what you said about finding the grace to move through. That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, and what you said about teenagers feeling this pressure to be perfect, I think that doesn't stop, and once you leave adolescence.
Right.
I think if anything, it probably gets a little more profound for a lot of us. So I work with a lot of women who this pressure to be perfect, particularly having my practice in New York City, where there's just such a pressure in general for a lot of us. And so then this pressure to be perfect and to have the perfect relationship, the perfect job, the perfect body, it's so closely connected to anxiety. So knowing that we can, that it's okay to just tap into the fear, to give it a voice. And that's where a lot of the vocal work that I do comes in. So sometimes the music that I make with clients is messy, is loud, is disorganized. And that's giving, that's telling them and their bodies and their spirits, I guess, on such a deep level, like, it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You could be heard and seen and validated when you're not perfect. Kind of letting the messy parts play a little bit, because so often so much energy is going into keeping it all together. And sometimes we have to unpack that a little bit, not completely. And again, with skill and with grace and with awareness, to not unpack everything so much that someone falls apart, but just to kind of peek. I use a lot of metaphors in my work. So peeking under the covers, whatever it is, looking under the hood. I think that's something Carrie Nola talks a lot about with practice building, is looking under the hood. So really just like looking under the hood of like, okay, if I look at this anxiety that's been sitting over my shoulder for the past week, I can do that without falling apart. I can do that and gracefully move through it. So sometimes the music making is really vulnerable and quiet and and tentative, and sometimes it goes to joy and sometimes not. I mean, and that's really the beauty of music, and the beauty of the therapeutic process is that to learn how to sit with uncomfortable feelings and not always having to tie them up in a nice little bow. You know?
Yeah. And I think it really speaks to what you talked about, again, with the state that you're in, New York, and just, the different pressures. It's really, giving the women, teen girls, families, it's permission to be human.
Yes.
Really, really,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
we are all humans. We are all imperfect. And it's okay because we're all learning. We all have different stories and you're learning about that. And when we give it voice, the stories then no longer have the power over us because we're being able to express it and explore it. And as you said, yeah, look under the hood and be able to unpack that a little bit. And when we're able to do that and step into that place of vulnerability, you really do gain your power back. And when I mean power, it's not power over somebody, but it's that internal powerfulness that you gain your own, like I am enough no matter where I am and no matter what is going on. So that's beautiful. Love it, love it, love it. Well, I'm curious then for your women that you work with, or even the parents or the teens, do you recommend, I guess, any books, or do you have any advice in between the sessions that you think helps support them during this whole process?
Definitely. So with a lot of like I said before, with a lot of the women that I work with, a lot of them either are reading Brene Brown or the themes that Brene Brown, writes about are really have become relevant in our work. So I often will recommend, some of her great books, Rising Strong, Daring Greatly. Aside from that, I really, particularly for parents, will recommend books around mindfulness, not only for themselves, but ways that they can use mindfulness with their teenagers. And that's a tricky age to use mindfulness, to practice it together. I also occasionally work with young children, and young kids will totally, most of the time, will tap into mindfulness so easily. I mean, they embody that so easily, and we lose it as we get older. Other things I recommend often are meditation apps. I'm a big fan of Insight Timer.
Oh, okay.
That's a great one. It has pre-recorded meditations as well as there's just a timer on there. So you can have the sound of a Tibetan singing bowl, and you could set it for, anywhere from a minute to like an hour, I think it is.
Okay.
And you can, program ambient sound. So that's something that I use personally in my own meditation practice. Other things I recommend. And then I really do recommend, like I said before, just tapping into music as a personal resource. And so I often write about creating personalized playlists.
Oh, nice.
So,
yeah.
So not just waiting until you're super anxious or super stressed and being like, oh, I need music, but having it at the ready. So I, for my own self, I have a playlist on my phone that's called For Me. And my Spotify account. Yeah, it's called For Me, and it's my music. Occasionally it's music that I might use with clients, but it's just music that speaks to me so deeply, that helps me come back to myself. Some of it is relaxing, some of it's energizing. And so I encourage clients and workshop participants often to think about that and to even break it down further. I've had people that I work with create playlists for sleep. Playlists for, doing work or doing homework, playlists for energizing, playlists for holding sad feelings. I had a client once who was like, I just created the saddest playlist ever. But it helped her like just have the space for that, and to know when the playlist is over, it was a container, it created this kind of holding space for those emotions. And so there's a lot of room for creativity with personalized playlists.
Absolutely true. And I'm laughing too, because there are many, many times that I have recommended to my clients about creating or setting aside time to allow themselves to feel the sadness. And I'm like, put on the saddest music, put on the saddest movie, allow yourself to truly tap into that. So that's awesome. You had a client come back and tell you that. So beautiful.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just to remind everybody that I will have all her recommendations on the show notes as well. So if you're driving and all of that, do not pull over. It's all good. It'll be on the show notes. And finally, Maya, I'd like to find out how, if people really want to get a hold of you, what's your website, other maybe social media feeds, how can they get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So my website is www.mayabenatar.com. It's MAYABENATTAR.com. Unfortunately, no relation to Pat Benatar, the great 80s singer. I wish. I am on Facebook. I am on Twitter. And I also have a free guided relaxation audio track that you can get through my website. So that's mayabenatar.com/guided-relaxation. And you just put in your email and you get sent to your inbox a guided relaxation audio track that I have recorded for your own personal use.
Beautiful. Well, I loved it. And thank you again for being on today and helping raise awareness of how different ways therapy can work, the different creative ways, not only just the mindfulness techniques, but music, voice, all of that. So, the listeners and parents and teens and women that are listening to it know that it's not just traditional therapy that also works, but there's other ways to be able to give voice to that so they can move through the anxiety. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole.
If you like this episode, I invite you to subscribe on iTunes to receive the weekly episode updates. If you liked what you were hearing, I also invite you to leave an honest rating and review on iTunes. This podcast is available on Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and now iHeartRadio. Thank you for listening to Launching Your Daughter with Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. For more information or to stay up to date, go to launchingyourdaughter.com. You can sign up for my email list or join my Facebook group. Thank you.